Hello and welcome to another edition of the NBA Outlet presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure to follow OTG on Twitter at OTGBasketball. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me tonight, Kory Waldron. What's up, Kory?
Nick, how you doing? It's been a crazy start to the offseason already. I'm
Yeah.
liking it.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff already happening. Obviously, we had the Paul George rumors earlier today. Sorry, Kory. But then we had a big trade be agreed upon yesterday, and that was the Celtics and Sixers. The Celtics will be sending number 1 overall pick they received from the Nets to the Sixers for the number 3 pick in this year's draft, and either potentially the Lakers 2018 pick that's protected. And if they don't convey that pick, they'll be sending the Kings 2019 pick. So initial thoughts on that trade, were you surprised? Were you amazed or what?
I wasn't entirely surprised because I kind of figured in the back of my mind that that pick was truly expendable, simply for the fact that the best players in this draft tend to be guards. And we know that Boston has Smart, Isaiah Thomas, Terry Rozier, a lot of guards. So it wouldn't really make sense for them to draft a guard.
It seemed like
Go
the
ahead.
number 1 overall pick was like a lock to be Markelle Fultz. So, and it seemed like the Celtics weren't 100% committed to him. So the Sixers were. The Sixers went in, made the attack move, building up all those picks all these years. It's finally paid off. It looks like Fultz is going to be a great player. So I think it's a good trade for both teams, especially if the Celtics are still going to keep that pick. And there was rumor that they were considering Josh Jackson at number 1. So if they were to take Josh Jackson at number 1 and now they're going to get him at number 3, it's definitely a great deal for them. And a great deal for the Sixers because it kind of just pushes the envelope moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, for the Sixers, I know that a lot of the talk before the trade went down was, are they going to go out and sign Kyle Lowry because they needed a point guard? And they pretty much just addressed that issue by signing Fultz. And, Lowry would have been 32, and now you just got a 20-year-old prospect. And if Philly can stay healthy, I mean, we saw last year when Embiid was healthy what they can do without Simmons. And now if you bring back Simmons and you get Fultz, like, they could be so interesting and threatening.
Yeah, from the Sixers' perspective, you bring in Fultz, who has that potential to be a superstar guard and add to that dynamic talent that you already have. And they kind of, like you mentioned, already lack guards. They were going to attack Kyle Lowry or George Hill in free agency, but now you get him. He kind of fits in better with what you already have. You have a player like Fultz. You have a player like Robert Covington. You have a player like Ben Simmons. You have a player like Dario Saric. You have Joel Embiid. Even Jahlil Okafor obviously has some talent, and they could probably move him for a pick. So there's plenty of young talent on this team. Then you have guys like TJ McConnell, just other guys on the bench, Holmes, like there's a lot of young talent on this team. And moving forward, there's going to have a lot of success in the future.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either if we see a jump in the Philly fan base. Because there's certainly a lot of people right now ordering Philly stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. We know we have some true Philly fans on OTG and Markelle and Joe. So, those guys were there, but when they were tanking. So now, it's kind of good for the fans, though, all those tough years of not even 20 wins. And now you look like you're finally going to compete for a championship in a few seasons if these guys all work out. And like you said, stay healthy, which is going to be a key component for this team.
Yeah, we know Philly loves their basketball. I mean, from the Celtics perspective, I mean, they just opened up more trades. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they moved that number 3 pick still, try and get like Jimmy Butler or somebody like that, or Paul George even.
I think it pretty much almost forces them to make a trade within the next year or two because they're just going to have so many picks that it almost doesn't make sense to have this many rookies on your team when you're this close to competing. So like you said, they could easily move this pick this year. They could maybe take the Paul George rental that we'll talk about a little bit later, but Butler's definitely out there. Gordon Hayward's a person, and who knows, with the amount of picks and talent and assets that the Celtics have, they can literally almost trade for anybody in the NBA. So don't be surprised if it's some crazy name out there on draft night that we didn't hear about all summer until now.
Yeah, and the fact matters, a lot of their draft picks they have, they're worth a lot. I mean, like even the Lakers pick, that's going to be worth something. If the Kings pick from 2019, that's likely still going to be worth something, like a lottery.
And then they have plenty of the mid-tier picks too. I think they have some picks from Memphis, some other teams down there, and a lot of second rounders. So there's a lot of different moves to be made for this team. And from the Celtics perspective, like you mentioned a little earlier, a lot of the rumor was they weren't completely sold on Fultz and the fact of being a winner, and they weren't sold on the fact that they wanted to get rid of one of their other young guards that they had. So this kind of confirms that they'll probably look to maybe keep Isaiah Thomas if they don't bring in a big-time guard, and they weren't ready to move forward with Fultz.
I mean, and I'm not totally okay with that. I mean, I know Isaiah Thomas had a phenomenal year. He's top 5 scorer in the league right now. You worry about his size. defensive unit, but Isaiah Thomas is obviously that weak link because of his size. So a guy like Fultz, who's 6'5" or 6'4", he gives you more length, and he can at least defend slightly better because he's a bigger body. But, I mean, all in all, Isaiah Thomas, you can't go wrong with the little guy.
Yeah, it's tough because the way that people are talking about Markelle Fultz and the potential that he has and maybe being a superstar, and they've talked about how this could really hurt Danny Ainge's legacy, even though he's obviously already killed the Nets and killed other trades. But, Fultz has a lot of potential, and you not taking him and maybe drafting someone 3 or making a trade and missing out on potentially a superstar type player would definitely hurt you in long term. And like you said, I'm kind of on that boat. I don't mean to hate on Isaiah Thomas because I love the way he plays. But obviously, every time you come down the floor from the other team's perspective, you're going to attack him because he's undersized, and there's really no place for him unless the person just is not a competent offensive player for him to hide.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, even against the series against Washington, we saw that. On Wall, you couldn't put him on Bradley Beal, and there's no one else even remotely sized close you could put him on.
Yeah,
but I'm going to keep trusting Danny Ainge because I do love like you tweeted last night from OTG. That's just got bigger. They have all of these assets and just so many moves. So I'm just going to keep trusting Danny Ainge. He did build the Celtics team that won the championship in 2009 or 2008, and he's won all those championships, as we know, with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale in the 80s. So they're definitely in a good spot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they turn these picks, and who knows, they could even move Isaiah. There's been talk about them moving him this summer too. So, I mean, there's plenty of moves on. There's almost any move that there's possibly out there is available for the Celtics just because of the assets they have. So they're pretty much a lock to make a trade this summer.
As long as they don't sign Blake Griffin, I'll be happy. I think any team that goes after Blake Griffin this offseason is foolish. I just don't trust them. I know that the Celtics seem to be one of the top teams that are going to be in the Blake Griffin hunt. And I just hope that Danny Ainge has some sense to stay away from a guy who can't play a full season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens because, they could make the trade for Butler and then maybe try to go after Griffin or maybe go after Hayward and Butler. It'll, a lot of moves on the table, like we said. But let's touch on something else that came out today, and it was dropped another Woj bomb that Paul George has told the Pacers that he plans to sign with the Lakers in 2018.
All right. So this isn't a shock. I mean, we've known this for me, I knew for a couple of years that there was always that chance. In Kobe, he was from LA, so we always know that a player has interest in going back to their hometown. Or we thought Kevin Durant might go to Washington. We knew LeBron with Cleveland. There's something always intriguing to a player about going back home and winning in front of trying to bring them a championship. And when your hometown is the Lakers, of all places, the team with 16 championships, it doesn't come as a giant surprise.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just like that Los Angeles, that spotlight, and there's no real star right now. Kobe had just recently retired, so there's a perfect opportunity to kind of build a legacy with the Lakers. And it's come out that, Paul George just hasn't been very happy with the talent that's been around him in Indiana after, going to the Eastern Conference Finals back-to-back years and then losing and then just losing guys here and there, Roy Hibbert, David West, George Hill. And now it's just been tough, and he just doesn't see the direction the team's going. And I know you're a Pacers fan, so what are your thoughts about George? Are you mad? Are you can see his perspective? Are you happy for him and mad for the Pacers?
As a fan, obviously, I'm disappointed because you never want to see the face of your franchise leave. I mean, but I'm not like I have a Paul George jersey. I'm not going to burn it by any means. For him, it's not the wrong decision because, again, big market. They're never going to be able to sign, 3 superstars. With LA, they have this year. They have D'Angelo Russell, Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, Jordan Clarkson. They have all these young players, and they have the cap space. So Paul George going out there, it just makes sense because he can possibly get, another superstar. Because if Paul George goes out there, then LA is always going to be in talks about bringing another superstar into town. Because once you have a superstar, more superstars are more likely to come and play with you. That's just how it is in the NBA.
Yeah, and especially if one of these young guys develop, like you mentioned, the Ingrams, the Randalls, the Russells. If one of these guys, becomes an all-star before then, it just is an added bonus. They do have a little bit of issue though because they want to bring in more players. They're going to have to dump some of these ugly contracts. That Luol Deng contract, that Timothy Mozgov contract. Some of these guys are going to have to be gone if they want to bring in two big names.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it's – I know that he said he's going to sign with the Lakers in 2018, or he prefers to sign, or whatever the hell that means. I prefer to sign. I've read that headline like 4 times. Prefers. Like, yeah, okay, you prefer. But, I mean, I guess if you're the Lakers too, though, you have to be somewhat interested in possibly trading for him. Like, only because – you don't know what happens if he gets traded to a team like Cleveland or a team like Boston or a team like Houston come out of nowhere and just try and scoop up Paul George. Because if Paul George goes to a team and say they win 55 games and they make it to the Western Conference Finals or the Eastern Conference Finals, it's not a done deal then that he leaves that team, even though he may prefer to go to L.A. Because middle of the season deadline, he said that he wanted to win. I want to win.
I agree. No, I think you made a great point. I think if you're LA, you kind of try to hold off for as long as you can. If they offer you a really good deal, you definitely hop on it. But like you said, if the Cavs pick him up or another contending type team pick him up and they have an opportunity to maybe get really close or even maybe go to the finals and lose, it's kind of hard to leave a team that goes to the finals. When you're right there to get a championship, especially when you lose to a team, if it's a close series, you want to re-sign, you want to go back at it again next year. So I think that's a great point. It'd be interesting to see how much the Lakers are willing to offer the Pacers.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're the Pacers, because I think the Lakers have like $18 million of free cap or whatever because of the Mozgov deal and the Deng deal we mentioned. If I can get a draft pick from the Lakers and maybe like Jordan Clarkson or one of those guys, I'll take Deng's contract or Mozgov's contract as long as I'm getting a young asset and some type of prospect.
Yeah.
Draft.
And this is where it's been kind of rumored that a third team could get involved and pick up one of those contracts too, if they want to get rid of both of them or something like that. I mean, the only thing with this year, they have the high pick and then they have the low. They have a late pick too from the Lou Williams deal. But that one, I don't know about how much value it's really going to carry if that's enough to dump one of those guys. But who do you think is going to be calling for Paul George the most this upcoming week?
This upcoming week? I'm going to do a sleeper pick. I'm going to say Boston's got to be the favorite to offer because and I still think I just tweeted this before, if he heads to Boston with the team they have and how competitive they are, and if he just maybe sees the culture they're building or just, has a couple of one-on-one talks with Danny Ainge, talks to Brad Stevens, who we know is a phenomenal young head coach, him to want to stay there. And then for a sleeper pick, I'm not ruling out Miami. Miami has some draft picks. They have some young prospects. And again, if Pat Riley could somehow get Paul George in the door next to Whiteside, next to Goran Dragic, I'm sure Paul George walks away from that scenario either.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, for these teams that aren't the Lakers, do you want to take this risk? And, and they always say, as soon as the guy, if you're going to trade for him, it makes it a lot easier to re-sign him because you let him see the culture, let him see the team, let him get to know the players, build relationships with the staff. And I think that's important. It's just such a weird opportunity because you don't know how much the Pacers are really asking for Paul George at this point because they lost all leverage with this news becoming public. So it's like, how much are you willing to give up and how much are they asking at this point? What do you think is the going asking rate? A young player in a pick or maybe just one high lottery pick and you'll get it?
There has to be a draft pick involved just because I can't imagine I can't imagine Kevin Pritchard not wanting a draft pick. He's definitely had success in the past with Aldridge and Brandon Roy with his Portland days. So I'm going to say definitely a lottery draft pick and probably a young player. And I wouldn't be surprised if Pritchard would be okay with taking a salary dump of someone. If it was like a $15 to $25 million contract just to make it easier on the other team for getting Paul George.
Yeah, and that would probably be a likely scenario. Would have to take some money back in the deal. If the Cavs offered you straight up Kevin Love for Paul George right now, would you take it?
Personally, no. But I do think if you're trying to not rebuild and you're trying to win now, I don't think that's the worst case scenario. because if you trade for Kevin Love, then Jeff Teague is more likely to re-sign, because now Jeff Teague is a question mark if you can even bring him back, because you don't want to overpay him. I know they had hopes of bringing in Gordon Hayward, but if you bring in Kevin Love and you have Miles Turner, you have Stevenson, it makes it more attractable to another star to want to come to Indiana.
Yeah, it definitely does, and it kind of makes you a little bit more relevant. The other option would be is you take the Kevin Love trade and then you go and flip Kevin Love for a player and an asset, because his contract's a little bit easier to trade, and being signed the next 2 years, but he's obviously not the same player Paul George is.
Yeah, and then I don't know how much value you get from a flip on a flip of Kevin Love. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how well you'd be able to move him, or how quickly you'd be able to move him.
Unless it's a 3-team trade.
Yeah, right, which is another thing that I saw.
Celtics have had a lot of interest in Kevin Love for a long time, and we mentioned their picks and how easy it would be for them to give up a first-round pick or even 2 first-round picks. They could literally give up one of the picks they've gotten next year or the year after, depending on what happens with the protection, and they could, still draft a guy they want in this draft.
Oh, I mean, honestly, Nick, that would be beautiful if from the Celtics perspective, because the 2 things they lack is another scorer and rebounding. And Kevin Love would be fantastic for the rebounding department for Boston, which is something that we saw them lack all playoffs.
And he fits the offensive system they run. His ability to shoot the 3 ball, and in Cleveland he's kind of added more to his game, like you mentioned on the finals halftime show and recaps. He's done a lot more of the little things, and I think that's important for a team like Boston. And it definitely would make sense too. And then they can go and add one of their small forwards or 2 guards, and next thing you know, they're looking really good.
And he'd probably be a number 2 option for them too, behind Isaiah.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely would get more looks there than he is in Cleveland right now. Obviously, playing with LeBron and Kyrie is going to take that away, but IT is the one there, and no one else on that team is really like, oh, I want to shoot the ball a ton. We saw what happened when IT was out. Sometimes it was like they were passing the ball so much that no one wanted to shoot.
Yeah, and Avery Bradley, we saw him get hot late in the playoffs, but he was pretty cold and not very aggressive in the first half of it.
Yeah. So I think definitely could use a score, and then you add maybe they still add Paul George or a Butler, or they just go out and sign Hayward. But that wraps it up for today. Thanks everybody for listening. Kory, thanks for hopping on.
Thanks, Nick.